We bought two identical F-150s, put the same engine, the same miles, and the same driver behind the wheel of both, and the only thing we changed was the oil. One truck ran the cheapest conventional oil we could find, the other ran premium full synthetic. 50,000 miles later, we pulled both engines apart, and what we found inside surprised even me. And I have been building and rebuilding these engines for over 15 years. Stick around because the damage on one of these trucks was not where any of us expected it to be. Let's talk about how we set this up, because if the test isn't controlled properly, the results don't mean anything. We found two 2019 F-150s with the 5.0-liter Coyote V8, both off-lease, both with under 3,000 miles on the odometer, both the same trim level, same rear axle ratio, same tires from the factory. We had them inspected by an independent shop before we started, and both engines were mechanically identical, healthy compression across all 8 cylinders, clean oil, no prior issues. From that starting point, we split them into Truck A and Truck B. Truck A ran a conventional 5W30 oil, the kind you'll find on the bottom shelf at any auto parts store for around $18 for 5 quarts. Truck B ran a premium full synthetic 5W30, the kind that runs closer to $45 for the same 5 quarts. Same filter brand on both trucks, same fuel from the same stations, and we alternated drivers weekly, so no single driving style skewed the results. Both trucks were driven on the exact same combination of highway and city miles, roughly 60% highway and 40% stop and go, because that mix stresses an engine in a realistic way rather than babying it with pure highway cruising. Oil change intervals matter just as much as the oil itself, so we didn't cheat either truck. Truck A on the conventional oil was changed every 5,000 miles, which is the traditional recommendation for dyno oil under normal conditions. Truck B on the full synthetic was changed every 10,000 miles, which is within the range most full synthetic manufacturers advertise and close to what Ford's own oil life monitor typically calculates for this engine under mixed driving. This is important because a lot of people assume synthetic oil is just conventional oil with a fancier label, but the base chemistry is genuinely different. Conventional oil is refined from crude petroleum, and even after refining, it still contains irregularly shaped molecules and trace impurities. Full synthetic oil is built from a controlled molecular structure, either through severe hydrocracking of petroleum or fully synthesized base stocks, which gives it a much more uniform molecule size. That uniformity is what allows synthetic oil to resist breaking down at higher temperatures and to keep its viscosity more stable over a longer stretch of miles. At the 15,000 mile mark, we pulled oil samples from both trucks and sent them to a lab for a full used oil analysis before the scheduled change. This is the same kind of test fleet operators run constantly to catch problems before they become expensive. The conventional oil in Truck A already showed a viscosity reading that had thinned out past the original 30 weight spec, meaning the oil had sheared under heat and was no longer providing the same film thickness between moving parts. The synthetic in Truck B, even though it had double the mileage on it at that point relative to its own change interval, still tested within spec for viscosity. The lab also flagged something called TBN, or total base number, which tells you how much of the oil's acid-neutralizing additive package is still active. A fresh oil typically starts around 8 to 10 on the TBN scale. Truck A's conventional oil had dropped to around 3.2 at 15,000 miles into its cycle, which is getting close to the point where the oil can no longer effectively neutralize the acidic byproducts of combustion. Truck B's synthetic was still sitting around 6.5, which meant it had plenty of protective capacity left, even approaching its own change interval. By the 30,000 mile mark, the differences stopped being just numbers on a lab report and started showing up as physical wear metals in the oil itself. This is where things got interesting. The used oil analysis measures trace amounts of iron, copper, aluminum, and lead in parts per million. And those numbers tell you exactly what is wearing down inside the engine before you ever see a warning light. Truck A's conventional oil samples were consistently running higher in iron content, which typically points to wear on cylinder walls, piston rings, and the valve train. We were seeing iron levels around 22 parts per million on Truck A's samples versus around 11 parts per million on Truck B's synthetic samples at comparable points in their respective change cycles. Copper levels, which usually indicate wear on bearing surfaces and bushings, were also running roughly double on Truck A compared to Truck B. None of these numbers were catastrophic on their own at the 30,000 mile mark, but the trend line mattered more than any single data point, and the trend on Truck A was climbing faster than Truck B's. If you are finding this test interesting so far, go ahead and hit that like button because the numbers get a lot more dramatic from here, and we have not even gotten to the teardown yet. Somewhere between 30,000 and 40,000 miles, Truck A started developing a noticeable change in behavior that you could actually hear and feel, not just read on a lab report. Cold start noise became more pronounced, a faint tick from the top end that lasted a few seconds longer each cold morning before quieting down once oil pressure built up. This is a classic symptom of increased clearance in the valve train, usually from either wear on the camshaft lobes or the hydraulic lifters, not seating properly because of degraded oil film. Truck B never developed this noise at any point during the test. Oil consumption also started to diverge. Truck A was consuming roughly half a quart of oil between changes by the time it crossed 35,000 miles, which is within a range some owners would consider normal, but Truck B was consuming almost nothing measurable between its changes, staying essentially full from one service to the next. Fuel economy told a similar story. Truck A's average dropped by about 1.2 miles per gallon compared to its baseline reading from the first 1,000 miles, while Truck B's average dropped by less than half a mile per gallon over the same span. Thinner, more consistent film strength means less friction inside the engine, and less friction means the engine isn't working as hard to turn itself over, which shows up directly at the pump. We crossed the 50,000 mile mark on both trucks within the same week, and that is when we pulled both engines and sent them to an independent machine shop for a full teardown and measurement, the same process a shop would use to diagnose a customer's engine for warranty or rebuild purposes. This is where the real story lives, because oil analysis tells you trends, but a teardown tells you the actual physical condition of the parts. Starting with the camshafts, since that cold start tick on Truck A gave us a hint of what to expect. Factory spec for the Coyote's intake lobe lift is right around 0.510 inches when new. Truck B's camshaft measured within 0.005 of an inch of factory spec across every lobe, essentially unchanged after 50,000 miles. Truck A's camshaft showed measurable lobe wear, with several lobes down between 0.003 and 0.006 inches from spec. That might sound small, but on a precision component like a camshaft, that is enough wear to alter valve timing slightly and explain exactly the kind of top-end noise and minor power loss we had been hearing and feeling in the second half of the test. The rod and main bearings told an even clearer story. We measured bearing clearances using Plastigauge, the same method any competent engine builder uses to check clearance without fully disassembling the crankshaft. Factory spec on the Coyote's rod bearings runs in a tight range, generally between 0.0010 and 0.0026 inches, depending on the specific bearing position. Truck B's bearings were still sitting comfortably within factory spec, close to where you would expect a healthy engine with proper maintenance to be at this mileage. Truck A's bearings had opened up beyond factory spec on 3 of the 8 rod bearing positions, and while that is not an immediate failure, it is the kind of measurement that tells an engine builder this engine is on a faster track toward a rod knock than it should be at only 50,000 miles. Bearing wear like this happens because the oil film separating the bearing from the crankshaft journal thins out under heat and load, and once that film gets thin enough, you get metal-to-metal contact at a microscopic level every single time that piston fires. Over tens of thousands of cycles, that microscopic contact adds up to measurable material loss. We also pulled the valve covers and intake to look at carbon buildup and sludge. Since this engine uses direct injection, which is notoriously prone to intake valve deposits regardless of oil type. Both trucks had some carbon buildup on the intake valves because that's largely a fuel injection design issue rather than an oil issue, but Truck A had noticeably more sludge accumulation inside the valve covers and along the timing chain guides. Sludge forms when oil breaks down under heat and starts to oxidize, leaving behind a thick, dark residue that can restrict oil flow to critical areas like the timing chain tensioners. Truck A's timing chain also showed measurably more stretch than Truck B's, enough that if this were a customer vehicle, we would be recommending a chain and guide replacement within the next 10,000 to 15,000 miles to avoid a jumped timing chain down the road. Truck B's chain was still within the elongation spec you would expect from a well-maintained engine at this mileage. Now let's talk about what this actually means for your wallet, because the oil type isn't the only factor in the real cost of ownership here. Over 50,000 miles, Truck A went through 10 oil changes at the 5,000 mile interval, each costing us about $45 for oil and filter when we did it ourselves, putting total maintenance cost at $450. Truck B went through 5 oil changes at the 10,000 mile interval, but the synthetic oil and filter cost closer to $75 per change, putting total maintenance cost at $375. Even before you factor in engine wear, the synthetic oil truck actually cost less in maintenance over the same 50,000 miles simply because it needed fewer changes. That surprises a lot of people who assume synthetic oil is automatically the more expensive path. Now factor in the wear differences we measured. Based on the bearing clearances and cam lobe wear we found on Truck A, a realistic projection puts that engine somewhere between 30,000 and 60,000 miles away from needing a bearing service or a top-end rebuild, a repair that typically runs between $2,500 and $4,500, depending on the shop and the extent of the work. Truck B's measurements suggest that engine has a realistic shot at running well past 150,000 or even 200,000 miles before it needs that kind of major work, assuming the oil discipline continues. Before we get to the final verdict, if this kind of real teardown testing is something you want to see more of, subscribe and turn on notifications, because we've got 2 more trucks running a similar test right now, comparing oil filter brands, and those results are going to surprise you just as much. So does this mean conventional oil is garbage and you should never use it? Not exactly, and it's worth being honest about the nuance here. Conventional oil, changed diligently at shorter intervals, especially in an engine that isn't working particularly hard, can still provide reasonable protection over the life of a vehicle. Plenty of trucks from the 80s and 90s ran conventional oil their entire lives and made it to high mileage, because those engines ran lower operating temperatures, lower horsepower per cylinder, and far less thermal stress than a modern, turbocharged or high-output naturally aspirated engine like this Coyote V8. Modern engines run tighter tolerances, higher compression, and hotter combustion temperatures to hit today's power and emissions targets, and that combination puts more stress on the oil film than engines from a couple decades ago. What our test showed is that under identical real-world conditions, with identical mileage and identical driving patterns, the full synthetic oil in Truck B provided measurably better protection against wear, better resistance to breakdown, less sludge formation, and ultimately a healthier engine at the 50,000 mile mark. And it did all of that while actually costing less in total maintenance spend over that same period because of the longer service intervals it allows. If you're currently running conventional oil in a modern engine like this, and you're following the 5,000 mile interval religiously, you're not doing anything catastrophically wrong. But based on what we found in this test, switching to a quality full synthetic is one of the cheapest insurance policies you can buy for a modern engine. The upfront cost per bottle is higher, but the extended interval and the reduced wear we measured on the camshaft, the bearings, and the timing chain all point toward an engine that's going to cost you significantly less over its lifetime, not more. That's the part most people get backwards when they're standing in the auto parts aisle trying to save $20 on an oil change. We're going to keep both of these trucks running past 50,000 miles to see how the gap continues to widen, and we'll be back with an update once Truck A hits whatever comes next for that bottom end. If you found this test valuable, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which oil you currently run and why, and share this with anyone who's ever told you oil is oil and it doesn't matter what you put in your engine. I'll see you in the next one.